Marcus Williams sat in his rusted Honda Civic outside the courthouse, his hands trembling as he clutched the paper that had just redefined his entire world. The judge's decision was final, and no amount of pleading had changed the outcome. He'd lost his appeal for the job reinstatement that would have meant everything, ruled against by a stern-faced judge who hadn't looked him in the eye even once. And now he had exactly $43 to his name, a 6-year-old son named Elijah, waiting at his sister's apartment, in a future that felt like a road disappearing into fog. 3 months earlier, Marcus had been a devoted maintenance supervisor at a downtown commercial building, a man who never missed his son's bedtime, who read stories with different voices for each character, who made dinosaur-shaped pancakes every Saturday. But a wrongful accusation from a senior manager missing equipment that Marcus never touched had led to his termination. And despite his innocence, despite character witnesses and 12 years of spotless service, the civil court appeal had gone nowhere. The judge's gavel sealing his fate with one dispassionate knock that still echoed in Marcus's mind like thunder that wouldn't fade. Now, 6 weeks after that courthouse defeat, Marcus worked 3 part-time jobs: early morning grocery stocking, afternoon delivery driving, and weekend custodial work, barely scraping together rent for the tiny 1-bedroom apartment he shared with Elijah, sleeping on a lumpy couch while his son took the only bedroom. And though exhaustion lived in his bones like a permanent guest, Marcus never let Elijah see him break, always greeting his boy with a smile that hurt his face to hold, but which he wore like armor against a world that seemed determined to crush them both. It was a Thursday evening in late October, when the rain came down like the sky had split open, sheets of water turning the streets into rivers, and Marcus was driving home from his delivery shift, his windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge, when he saw them 2 small figures huddled under a bus stop shelter that offered almost no protection, their bright yellow raincoats standing out like sunflowers in a storm, and something in Marcus's chest tightened because they couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. 2 identical girls, with dark hair plastered to their faces, clearly twins, and clearly alone. He pulled over without thinking, his bald tires hydroplaning slightly on the flooded asphalt, and he rolled down his window, rain immediately soaking his shoulder as he called out, "Hey, you girls okay? Where are your parents?" The twins looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, and one of them she had a small butterfly clip barely hanging onto her, wet hair said in accented but clear English, "Our father. He was supposed to pick us up from Chinese school, but his phone goes to voicemail, and the teacher had emergency and had to leave, and we've been waiting for 2 hours, and we don't know what to do." Marcus felt his heart crack because he knew that fear, that abandonment feeling, even if these girls' situation was surely just a miscommunication, and he said, "I'm Marcus. I have a son about your age, and I can't leave you here in this storm. Do you know your address, your father's name? We'll figure this out together, okay?" The second twin, who had a small backpack clutched to her chest like a shield, whispered to her sister in Mandarin, and butterfly-lipped girl translated, "Lily is scared because we're not supposed to talk to strangers, but we're also very cold. And Mei Chun, that's our teacher, told us to use good judgment, and you have kind eyes." Marcus felt something warm push through his exhaustion, and he said, "Smart girls, being careful is important. How about this? You can both see my phone. I'll call the non-emergency police line right in front of you, tell them the situation, and we'll warm up in my car with the heat on while we wait for instructions or reach your dad. Does that sound okay?" The girls conferred again, then nodded, and they climbed into his back seat, dripping and shivering, and Marcus immediately turned the heat to maximum, handed them the only towel he had in his car, a faded beach towel from a trip. Years ago when life was different, and, sure enough, he called the non-emergency number, explained the situation to a dispatcher who took down all the details. The girl's name Sophie and Lily Chun, their father's name Judge David. Chun and Marcus's heart actually stopped for 2 full seconds when he heard that name, that title, because Judge David Chen was the man who had denied his appeal. The man whose signature was on the document that had devastated Marcus's hope of getting his job and his stability back. Marcus's hands went numb and his throat went dry. But he looked in the rearview mirror at these 2 shivering little girls who were now singing softly to each other in Mandarin, probably trying to comfort themselves, and he realized that whatever anger or bitterness he carried toward their father, these children were innocent, cold, scared, and in need of help. And his own moral compass, the one his grandmother had installed in him with firm love and Sunday lessons, wouldn't let him do anything but care for them as if they were his own. The dispatcher said officers were stretched thin due to accident calls from the storm, and since the girls were safe and Marcus had identified himself fully, they'd keep trying to reach Judge Chen and would call back. So Marcus hung up and said, "Okay, girls, we're going to wait a bit. Are you hungry?" Sophie, the one with the butterfly clip, nodded eagerly, and Lily whispered, "We haven't eaten since school lunch." Marcus's stomach growled in solidarity, because he hadn't eaten either, having skipped meals to save money, but he had emergency provisions. And he reached into his glove compartment and pulled out 2 granola bars as dinner and handed them back without hesitation, saying, "Not gourmet, but they'll help." And the girls accepted them with thank yous, so polite and sincere that Marcus felt his eyes sting with unexpected emotion. 20 minutes passed, then 40, the rain never letting up, and Marcus kept trying Judge Chun's number that the girls recited from memory, but it went straight to voicemail each time, and Sophie explained, "Father had a big important meeting today. Sometimes his phone dies because he forgets to charge it. He gets very focused on his work." Marcus nodded, understanding that single-parent tunnel vision, and he said, "Tell me about yourselves. What do you like to do?" And the girls opened up like flowers finding sunlight, telling him about their love of piano, Sophie, and painting Lily, about how they missed their mother who had passed away 3 years ago from an illness, about how their father tried very hard, but sometimes seemed sad and distant, about their cat named Dumpling, who was probably wondering where they were. And Marcus listened with his whole heart, sharing stories about Elijah, about their own struggles, about the dinosaur pancakes, and somehow in that steamed-up car, with rain drumming on the roof, 4 strangers became something like friends. When an hour had passed, and still no word from Judge Chen, and the dispatcher called back saying they still couldn't reach him, but confirmed his home address through records, Marcus made a decision that he knew was risky, possibly foolish, but felt deeply right. He said, "Girls, I'm going to drive you home. It's not far according to this address, and you'll be safe and warm there, even if we have to wait for your dad on the porch, okay?" The twins agreed with relief, washing over their faces. And Marcus drove carefully through the flooding streets to an address in Mapleton Heights, a neighborhood where houses had columned porches and 3-car garages, so different from his own cramped part of town that it felt like crossing into another country. Judge Chun's home was a beautiful 2-story, colonial with warm lights glowing in the windows, and as Marcus pulled into the circular driveway, the front door burst open, and a middle-aged Chinese man came running out without an umbrella, his expensive suit already soaking, his face a portrait of panic and relief. And Marcus knew immediately this was Judge Chen, even before the girls screamed "Baba," and tumbled out of the car into their father's arms. Marcus stepped out slowly, rain drenching him instantly, and he watched the reunion with a bittersweet ache in his chest, remembering his own embraces with Elijah. And Judge Chen looked up from kissing his daughters' heads, his eyes meeting Marcus's, and there was a flash of recognition, confusion, then something deeper and more complicated passing between them. Judge Chen ushered the girls inside with instructions to Mrs. Wang, apparently. A housekeeper who'd been frantic then came back out to Marcus, and he said, his voice thick with emotion and rain and something like shame, "Mr. Williams, I don't understand. How did you? "Why did you?" And Marcus said quietly, "They needed help, Your Honor. Simple as that. I found them stranded, kept them safe, tried to reach you, couldn't. So I brought them home, and now I'll be going." He turned to leave, but Judge Chin's voice stopped him. "Wait, please come inside. You're soaked, and we need to talk." Inside the warm, elegant home that smelled of jasmine tea and furniture polish, Marcus stood awkwardly in the foyer, dripping on expensive tile, while Sophie and Lily changed into dry clothes, and Judge Chen brought him a towel and a confused expression that carried the weight of 1,000 questions. Mrs. Wong brought tea, and the judge dismissed her for the evening, then sat across from Marcus in a living room that probably cost more than Marcus would earn in 5 years. And he said, "Mr. Williams, I recognized you immediately, and I cannot fathom why you would help my daughters knowing who I am, knowing what my ruling meant for you." Marcus wrapped his cold hands around the teacup, its warmth seeping into his fingers like forgiveness he didn't know he needed, and he said, "Your Honor, I won't lie and say I wasn't angry about your decision. I am, because I believe you were wrong about me, and that ruling has put me and my son in a real hard place. But those girls out there in that storm, they weren't you, they weren't the court system. They weren't my appeal or my problems. They were just 2 scared kids who needed an adult to do the right thing, and my grandmother raised me to be that adult, regardless of circumstance." Judge Chen's eyes glistened, and he set down his own tea with shaking hands, and he said, "I need to tell you something, Mr. Williams, something that has haunted me since the day I signed that ruling. I had doubts, serious doubts about the evidence against you. The case was circumstantial at best, but I was under pressure. Political pressure from connections to the building's ownership group, and I convinced myself I was following the letter of the law. But the truth is I took the path of least resistance instead of the path of most justice, and I have regretted it every single day since." The admission hung in the air like a confession in a sanctuary, and Marcus felt anger and validation and something like grief all swirling together in his chest. And he said, his voice breaking slightly, "Do you know what it's like to tell your 6-year-old son that you can't afford his school field trip, or new shoes when his toes are cramped, or the robotics class he talked about for weeks? Do you know what it's like to be innocent and still lose everything because someone in power didn't want to face inconvenience?" Judge Chun's face crumpled, and he said, "No, I don't know that specifically, but I know loss. Mr. Williams, I lost my wife 3 years ago, and in my grief I became rigid, mechanical, hiding behind law books and precedents because feeling anything real was too painful, and I made my daughters orphans of my emotional absence, just like the court system made you a victim of my moral cowardice, and I am profoundly, deeply sorry." The apology didn't fix anything material, didn't put money in Marcus's account or time back in his life, but it cracked something open in both men, and before either could speak again, Sophie and Lily came padding down the stairs in matching pajamas, and Sophie said, "Mr. Marcus, will you stay for dinner? Mrs. Wong made dumplings before she left, and there's too many for just us, and we want to hear more about Elijah and the dinosaur pancakes." Marcus looked at Judge Chen, who nodded with an expression that was part plea and part hope, and Marcus found himself saying yes. Found himself at a dinner table he never imagined sitting at, eating homemade dumplings that tasted like comfort and childhood, listening to the twins chatter and joke, watching Judge Chen slowly soften as he interacted with his daughters in a way that seemed newer and more present than perhaps he'd been in years. After dinner, Sophie brought out a photo album, showing Marcus pictures of their mother, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and an artist's hands, and Lily painted a picture at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration, and she titled it "The Kind Man in the Rain," and gave it to Marcus with a shy smile that made his heart feel too big for his chest. As the evening grew late, Judge Chen walked Marcus to the door, and he said, "Mr. Williams, I cannot undo my ruling directly without new evidence, but I can do something. I have connections, influence, and I know people in corporate management and city positions, and if you'll allow me, I would like to make some calls, not as a favor, but as a fraction of the restitution you deserve, and I'd also like to personally review your case file again with fresh eyes and an honest heart." Marcus studied the judge's face, looking for manipulation or pity, but found only genuine remorse and determination, and he said, "I don't want charity, Your Honor, but I won't say no to a fair shot, which is all I ever wanted in the first place." Judge Chen extended his hand, and Marcus shook it, and something passed between them that felt like the beginning of healing, like rain washing away old stains to reveal clean ground underneath. 3 weeks later, Marcus received a call from the facility's director of Mapleton Medical Center, offering him a position as maintenance manager. Better title, better pay, full benefits, and, when Marcus asked how they'd found him, the director mentioned a glowing reference from Judge David Chen, who'd apparently spoken of Marcus's character and reliability in terms that made him sound like a candidate for sainthood. Marcus took the job, and for the first time in months, he could breathe without his chest feeling like it was caught in a vice, could buy Elijah new shoes and sign him up for that robotics class, could even afford a real bed for himself instead of the couch. But the story didn't end with employment, because Judge Chen called him personally a week into the new job, and he said, "Mr. Williams, my daughters haven't stopped talking about you and Elijah. They've been asking if you might visit, and I know this is awkward given our history, but I wondered if perhaps you and your son might join us for dinner this Saturday. No obligations, just a meal, and maybe a chance for the kids to meet." Marcus hesitated, his pride wrestling with his gratitude, and with Elijah's recent loneliness. His son had few friends due to their frequent moves and tight budget, and finally Marcus said, "Let me ask Elijah, and I'll let you know." And when he did ask, Elijah's face lit up like Marcus had offered him the moon, and he said, "Twin sisters, and they have a cat. Can we go, Dad, please?" So that Saturday, Marcus and Elijah arrived at the Chen home with a simple bouquet of flowers and nervous hearts. And what unfolded was an afternoon of unexpected joy. Elijah and the twins played with Dumpling, built elaborate block towers, and laughed with the unself-conscious freedom of children who don't carry their parents' complicated history, while Marcus and Judge Chen talked with increasing honesty about fatherhood, loss, mistakes, and the strange grace that sometimes emerges from our worst moments. Over the following months, an unlikely friendship grew between the two families. Dinners alternating between homes, though. Marcus's apartment was humble. The twins loved it because Elijah showed them his rock collection and taught them card tricks, and they didn't see poverty. They saw warmth, and Judge Chen began volunteering with Marcus at a weekend community center, both men serving meals to families in crisis, the judge's eyes opening wider each week to realities he'd only seen from a bench and a gavel. One evening, after the kids had fallen asleep during a movie night at the Chen house, Judge Chen said to Marcus, "You know, that night in the rain, you could have driven past my daughters. You could have justified it 100 ways, given what I'd done to you, but you didn't, and that choice has changed my life. Fitz reminded me that justice isn't just about law, it's about humanity. And I've started ruling differently, asking different questions, seeing the people behind the cases, and I have you to thank for that." Marcus shook his head and said, "I didn't do anything special, Your Honor. I just treated your daughters the way I'd want someone to treat my son. That's basic decency, not heroism." Judge Chen smiled sadly and said, "Marcus, in a world where people are cruel for minor reasons, choosing kindness despite major ones is absolutely heroism, and you've shown me what my wife used to try to teach me, that our character is defined not by how we treat those who can help us, but by how we treat those we've harmed, and, inversely, by how we respond to those who've harmed us. The two men sat in comfortable silence, the rain gentler this time pattering against the windows, and Marcus realized that the storm that had brought them together had washed away more than just the dirt of the streets. It had washed away his bitterness, the judge's rigidity, and revealed underneath two imperfect fathers trying their best. Two men who'd found in each other's brokenness a strange kind of brotherhood. A year after that rainy October evening, Marcus stood in Judge Chen's backyard during a summer barbecue, watching Elijah, Sophie, and Lily perform a talent show they'd choreographed, complete with piano music, magic tricks, and a painting unveiling. And he felt a contentment he'd thought lost forever, a sense that life, despite its cruelty and unfairness, sometimes circles back with unexpected gifts. Judge Chen stood beside him, flipping burgers with the focus he once reserved for case law, and he said quietly, "Marcus, I've been meaning to tell you I'm retiring from the bench next month. I've been offered a position teaching law and ethics at the university, and I'm going to take it because I want to train the next generation of judges to see people first and precedent second, and that's directly because of what you taught me." Marcus felt his throat tighten, and he said, "Your Honor," but the judge interrupted. "David, please, call me David." And Marcus nodded and said, "David, you're giving me too much credit. You chose to listen. To change, that's on you." David Chen smiled and said, "Maybe, but you gave me a reason to, and sometimes that's all we need. One moment, one choice, one person who shows us who we could be instead of who we've been." As the afternoon faded into evening and the kids caught fireflies in jars they'd later release, Marcus thought about fate and choice, about how the same rain that had seemed like another burden had actually been a baptism of sorts, washing both him and the judge clean of their worst selves and offering them a chance to build something better, not just for themselves, but for their children, who now shared secrets in summer days and a friendship innocent of the complicated adult history that had brought them together. On the drive home that night, Elijah sleepy in the back seat, clutching a painted picture Lily had made for him, Marcus felt his son's small hand tap his shoulder, and Elijah said, "Dad, I'm really glad you helped Sophie and Lily. That rainy day they're my best friends now." And Mr. David said, "I have good character, just like you." And I didn't know what that meant exactly, but it sounded important. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He blinked away, and he said, "Character means doing the right thing, even when it's hard, buddy, especially when it's hard. And yeah, it's the most important thing, more important than money, or jobs, or winning. It's about being kind and fair and brave when it matters most." Elijah considered this with the seriousness of childhood wisdom, then said, "Like how you helped them, even though you were tired and wet and didn't have much money." And Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with pride and love, and he said, "Exactly like that, Elijah, exactly like that." In that moment, Marcus understood that the greatest inheritance he could leave his son wasn't financial security or social status, though he'd fight to provide those things, but rather this internal compass, this bone-deep knowledge that our humanity is measured in how we treat each other when the storms come, and that sometimes the people we're called to help are the very ones we have most reason to ignore, and that grace is most powerful when it's least deserved, but given anyway, freely, like rain falling on the just and unjust alike, washing everything clean and making space for new growth and soil that seemed barren only moments before. Moral, true character isn't revealed in our moments of strength, but in our choice to show kindness when we've been wronged, to help those connected to our pain, and to trust that compassion even when it costs us something plants seeds of transformation we may never see but which grow into forests of change. For in the end, we are not defined by the judgments others place upon us, but by the grace we extend when we hold the power to withhold it. And sometimes the very person who closed the door in our face is waiting on the other side, ready to be changed by the key of our unexpected mercy.